The morning Audra Kelsey walked into the Hargrove Innovation Summit, she was running 7 minutes late and already annoyed about it. That wasn't what people remembered about that morning, though. What they remembered, what got talked about in break rooms and boardrooms for months afterward, was what happened when she saw the man with the duffel bag. He was standing near the registration table, looking like he'd taken a wrong turn somewhere between a hardware store and a conference center. Work boots that had seen real work. Jeans with a faded crease at the knee where they'd been folded too many times. A flannel shirt rolled to the elbows despite the October chill, because apparently the weather hadn't been consulted. And the duffel bag, olive green, the zipper partially broken, held closed with a carabiner clip, sat at his feet like an afterthought. Audra took all of this in the way she took in most things, quickly, categorically, and without much mercy. The Hargrove Innovation Summit was not a cheap event. Floor passes alone ran $2,400. The private exhibition tier, where serious investors and serious founders actually did serious business, started at $8,500. The kind of people who belonged here carried Italian leather portfolios and rehearsed their elevator pitches in the Uber on the way over. They did not carry duffel bags with broken zippers. She moved to the registration line, already pulling out her badge lanyard, already thinking about the 9 a.m. panel she was supposed to moderate. The man with the duffel bag was 2 spots ahead of her. She watched him hand over a printed confirmation, actual paper, not a phone screen, and heard the volunteer at the table say, with practiced neutrality, "Mr. Callum Reed, you're registered for the exhibition floor. Bay 14, Bay 14. That was in the back corner, where the organizers put the overflow exhibitors, the ones who'd applied late or who hadn't been able to afford the premium placement near the entrance. Audra had noticed Bay 14 last year. It was half hidden behind a support column, the kind of spot where good ideas went to be ignored. Fitting, she thought. Callum Reed picked up his badge, looped it around his neck, and hefted the duffel bag over his shoulder. As he turned, their eyes met briefly. He gave a small nod, the kind you give a stranger in an elevator. She looked away first. She told herself it was because she was busy. She was. Audra Kelsey was always busy. She'd built Kelsey Manufacturing Solutions from a 400-square-foot leased space in Raleigh into a 200-employee operation with contracts across 5 states. She'd done it in 9 years, starting at 31 with a business loan her father had co-signed and a manufacturing process she'd redesigned from scratch after watching her family's small factory get outsourced into nothing. She understood efficiency. She understood precision. She understood that in a room full of people competing for the same finite pool of investor attention, you had about 90 seconds to establish that you were worth someone's time. The man with the duffel bag, she had concluded in about 15, was not. She wasn't proud of that thought later, but she wasn't going to pretend she hadn't had it either. The summit opened at 9. Audra moderated the first panel, Supply Chain Resilience in a Fractured Economy, with the crisp, slightly impatient energy that made her panels run exactly on time and occasionally made panelists feel like they were being efficiently managed rather than warmly hosted. She didn't mind. Warmth, in her experience, rarely got things done. Getting things done got things done. By 10:30 she was free, lanyard tucked into her jacket pocket, coffee in hand, moving through the exhibition hall with the specific gait of someone who was evaluating and not particularly impressed. The hall was the usual landscape of ambitious signage and hopeful pitches, smart irrigation sensors, AI-assisted logistics software, a company trying to convince her that their blockchain-verified parts tracking was the future of supply chain integrity. She gave them 4 minutes and moved on. A robotics startup with a very enthusiastic founder who was clearly 23 and had never actually set foot on a factory floor. She was heading toward the exit when she passed Bay 14. She almost kept walking. What stopped her wasn't the display, there wasn't much of one. A folding table. The duffel bag open now with various components arranged on a cloth beside it. A small monitor showing what appeared to be a stress test graph. No banner, no brand identity, no pitch deck visible. Just Callum Reed sitting on a stool talking to nobody because nobody had stopped. What stopped her was the component on the table. She didn't know what it was, exactly. That was what stopped her. Audra Kelsey almost always knew what she was looking at. She'd been in manufacturing for 15 years. She could identify tooling equipment by sight, read a stress test graph in under a minute, spot a counterfeit fastener from 20 feet. Whatever was sitting on that cloth, she could not immediately categorize it, and that was unusual enough to make her slow down. It was roughly the size of a hardback book. Matte gray housing, CNC machined from the look of it. A series of what appeared to be thermal channels running along the exterior. But the pattern was wrong, unconventional, almost organic in its arrangement, and something about the weight of it. Even from 3 feet away, she could tell it was lighter than it should be for its size. She stopped. "What is that?" she asked. Not rudely, exactly, but without the professional friendliness she deployed when she was actually interested in being liked. Callum Reed looked up. He had the kind of face that was difficult to age, somewhere between 35 and 45, with the particular tiredness that came not from sleeplessness but from sustained effort. He didn't seem surprised that she'd asked. He also didn't seem particularly impressed that she'd stopped, which she noticed. "Heat exchanger," he said. "Redesigned transfer geometry. For what application?" "Currently prototyped for compact electric motor cooling, but the geometry works for anything with a high heat load in a constrained space." He paused. "Industrial, aerospace, EV drivetrain. Depends on who's interested." She set down her coffee and picked it up. He let her, which told her he wasn't precious about it. The weight was even more surprising in hand. She turned it over, running a thumb along one of the thermal channels. "This isn't standard fin geometry." "No, what is it?" "Biomorphic," he said, "modeled on vascular branching. The channel structure varies by diameter in a specific ratio, increases surface area by about 40% over conventional designs without adding mass." Audra looked at him. 40%. 42 in the last test series, but I round down. She set it back on the cloth. "Where'd you machine this?" "My garage." She waited for the rest of that sentence. There wasn't any. "Your garage," she repeated. "In Greensboro. I've got a Haas mini mill, a lathe, some tooling I've picked up over the years." He shrugged, the way people shrugged when they'd stopped expecting the shrug to impress anyone. "It's tight, but it works." Audra looked at the component again, then at the stress test graph on the monitor, then at him. "Who else have you talked to today?" Callum Reed glanced around Bay 14, at the empty space in front of his table, at the support column partially blocking the view from the main aisle. "You're the first person who stopped," he said. He said it without self-pity, which she found more uncomfortable than if he'd said it with it. She should have moved on. She had 3 meetings scheduled before lunch, and a dinner with a potential distribution partner that she needed to be present for, and she had learned a long time ago that potential was not the same as performance. But 42% surface area increase without added mass. In a heat exchanger the size of a hardback book, machined in a garage in Greensboro. "I have 15 minutes, she said. "Before my next meeting, walk me through the graph." He did. Later, she would try to explain what happened in those 15 minutes to her operations director, Simone, who had the patience for nuance that Audra sometimes lacked. "It wasn't like he gave a pitch," she said. "He just explained how it worked. Like a mechanic explaining an engine to someone who actually knows what an engine is. Was it good?" "It was the most efficient heat transfer geometry I've seen that wasn't proprietary to a defense contractor," Audra said. "In a package a third of the size, so yes. But that was later." In the moment, standing at Bay 14 at 10:47 in the morning, Audra was doing what she always did when she encountered something she hadn't expected. She was recalculating. The graph showed thermal performance data from 3 test series. The consistency across series was striking. Not the kind of variation you got from lucky prototyping, but the kind of tight band you got from understanding what you were doing. She asked him about the material selection. He answered without hesitating. She asked about the manufacturing tolerances. He told her, and then mentioned the limitation he hadn't solved yet, a specific bottleneck in the channel depth-to-width ratio that affected performance above a certain heat load threshold. He said it matter-of-factly, the way people talked about unsolved problems when they'd been living with them long enough to be honest. She asked what it would take to get past the bottleneck. "Better tooling than I have in the garage," he said, "and someone willing to let me run tests on actual application hardware instead of bench setups." "What kind of application hardware?" He named a motor platform. She knew it. Her company used a variant of it. 15 minutes became 30. She was late to her next meeting. She sent Simone an apologetic text and stayed. Here is what Audra Kelsey did not do in those 30 minutes. She did not make any promises. She did not offer anything she couldn't deliver. She did not perform enthusiasm she didn't feel because she felt enough of it that performance would have been redundant. She asked questions. He answered them. She asked harder questions. He answered those too, and when there was something he didn't know, he said so. He'd been working on the design for 3 years, he told her. Nights and weekends, around a full-time job doing precision machining for an automotive supplier. He'd filed a provisional patent 18 months ago with the help of a retired engineer he'd found through a community college outreach program. He had no funding, no business formation, and no formal engineering degree. He'd done 2 years of a mechanical engineering program at NC State before a family situation had pulled him out. and since then he'd educated himself the way people educated themselves when they couldn't afford to stop working. Nights, libraries, online courses, and the accumulated knowledge of people who answered questions on machining forums at 2 in the morning. He said this without shame and without the particular performance of humility that people sometimes deployed to make their disadvantages sound like virtues. He just said it. These were the facts. She looked at the component one more time. Have you talked to anyone about licensing? I talked to 2 companies last year. One told me to come back when I had a proper manufacturing setup. The other offered me a buyout that would have been fair if the geometry was worth what I think it's worth. He paused. I don't think it was fair. What did they offer? He told her. She kept her expression steady. It was low. It was very low. You turned it down. I turned it down. On what basis? He looked at her directly. On the basis that I spent 3 years figuring out something that nobody else had figured out, and I'm not giving it away because someone in a nice building thinks I should be grateful for the chance. Audra was quiet for a moment. That's either very smart or very stubborn. Probably both, he said. My daughter tells me the same thing. She collected her things. She gave him her card, her actual card, the one with her direct line, not the communications coordinator's number she handed to people she was being politely rid of. I'm going to think about this, she said, and I'm going to want to talk to you again. He took the card. All right, I make no promises, she said. It was a reflex, the disclaimer she'd trained herself to say because hope was a liability she'd watched people mismanage badly. I'm not asking for any, he said. She left Bay 14 with the duffel bag and the folding table and the matte gray component sitting on the cloth behind her. She thought about it all through her next meeting. She thought about it at lunch. She thought about it at the dinner with the distribution partner, contributing enough to the conversation to be present, while another part of her mind was running the numbers, sketching out the geometry, mapping it against every application she could think of. That night, in the hotel room, she pulled up the patent filing number he'd mentioned. He'd given it to her, unprompted, when she asked, and she read it, all of it, and then she read it again. Then she called Simone. I need you to look something up for me, she said. It's 11:15, Simone said, not unkindly. I know. Write down this patent number. There was a rustling sound, then a pen clicking. Simone had been with her for 6 years. She wrote down the number. There is a particular kind of skepticism that Audra Kelsey had developed over time, the kind that is not cynicism, but is its own form of discipline. She'd seen plenty of clever ideas that fell apart on contact with production reality. She'd seen inventors who could prototype beautifully and manufacture nothing. She'd seen people who understood the science but couldn't think about scale, cost, integration, the 1,000 practical details that turned a component into a product. She spent the next 3 weeks finding out which category Callum Reed fell into. She asked her head of engineering, a precise and somewhat ungenerous man named Victor, to review the patent filing without telling him where it came from. Victor came back with a 2-page technical memo. The first page was skeptical, the way Victor was always skeptical. The second page was not skeptical, and Victor was the kind of person who wrote memos in an order that reflected his actual conclusions, which meant he'd started skeptical and ended up somewhere else. She had Simone reach out to the community college program, where Callum had connected with the retired engineer. She had her legal team review the provisional patent status. She pulled production data on the motor platform he'd mentioned and mapped it against the performance figures he'd shown her on the graph. She drove to Greensboro. She did not announce this in advance. That was partly professional caution and partly something she hadn't entirely examined, a desire to see the thing as it was, not as it was prepared to be seen. The address led her to a house on a street of houses that looked like they'd been built in the mid-'80s and had been variously maintained since then. His was on the maintained end of the spectrum. The lawn was cut, the gutters were clean, the paint on the trim was holding. A minivan in the driveway with a faded sticker from an elementary school in the rear window. She knocked. A girl opened the door, maybe 10, 11, with the frank assessment children deploy on strangers. She looked at Audra with the particular expression of someone determining whether the visitor was worth getting an adult for. Is your father home? Audra asked. He's in the garage, the girl said. I can get him. I'll wait, Audra said. The girl disappeared. 30 seconds later, Callum Reed appeared from the side of the house, wiping his hands on a shop rag, a question on his face that became recognition. Mrs. Kelsey, he said. Mr. Reed. She looked past him toward the garage, which was open, the Haas mini mill visible inside, everything arranged with the careful organization of someone who'd learned to make limited space work. I told you I'd want to talk again. You didn't say you'd come here. No, she agreed. I didn't. He held the shop rag for a moment. Then, You want to see the machine? I want to see the machine, she confirmed. He walked her into the garage. The girl trailed behind at a distance that suggested she was trying to seem like she wasn't following. Audra pretended not to notice. She'd been 10 once and curious, and she understood the instinct. The setup was what it was, genuine, competent, and limited. The Haas was an older model, maintained to a standard that impressed her. You could tell by how a person kept their equipment what they thought about craft. The tooling was organized by type and size. On a workbench along one wall, a row of heat exchanger components in various stages. Raw stock, rough geometry, finished units, and one that had been cut open lengthwise, the internal channel structure exposed for examination. She picked up the cut section and looked at it for a long time. How long does it take you to machine one unit? She asked. About 4.5 hours, start to finish, on this machine. Proper CNC setup with dedicated fixtures, you could get it to 45 minutes, maybe less. Depends on how aggressive you want to push the feeds. She turned the cut section in the light. The channel geometry was intricate, the walls thin, the branching structure immediately recognizable once you knew what you were looking at. Can I ask you something? She said. Sure, you could have licensed this 18 months ago. Low offer, you said, but still, why'd you keep going? He was quiet for a moment. She got the impression it wasn't that he didn't have an answer, but that he was deciding whether the answer was hers to have. My daughter, he said finally. She asks me about the project sometimes. What's happening with it, whether it's going anywhere? He was looking at the cut section, not at Audra. I don't want to tell her I quit because somebody lowballed me and I was too tired to argue. Audra looked at the girl who had drifted close enough to be part of the conversation without technically having entered it. She was looking at her father with an expression that Audra couldn't quite name. Not pride, exactly, but something adjacent to it, something that had more weight. She knows what you're working on? Audra asked. She knows what it does, he said. I told her it makes machines run cooler. She said that sounded important. She was 8. A pause. I thought maybe she was right. Audra set the cut section back on the workbench. She looked at the organized tooling, the careful maintenance, the years of night work visible in the progression of components from rough to finished. I want to run a formal evaluation, she said. 30 days. My engineering team, a controlled test on our motor platform, full confidentiality, formal agreement, compensation for your time. At the end of 30 days, if the performance holds up, we talk about a real arrangement. She looked at him. And I mean a real arrangement, not a buyout that insults you. A licensing structure that makes sense for both sides, with production support from our side to get you to scale. Callum Reed looked at her for a long moment. What changed between the summit and now? I read the patent, she said. And I talked to my engineer, and I drove here and saw how you keep your equipment. She paused. And I don't like being wrong about people, so I try to get more information before I conclude anything. Something shifted in his expression. Not quite a smile, but in that neighborhood. 30 days, he said. 30 days, she confirmed, and nothing promised beyond that. I need to be clear about that. I know, he said, but I'll take 30 days. His daughter had drifted all the way in now, standing at the edge of the workbench, looking at the cut section of the heat exchanger, the way children look at things they find genuinely interesting. She picked it up, turned it over the same way Audra had. Is this the thing you're trying to sell? She asked her father. I'm not trying to sell it, he said. I'm trying to find the right home for it. She considered this. Then she looked at Audra with those frank, clear eyes. Are you the right home? Audra looked at the girl. She thought about her own father's factory, about the business loan and the leased space and the 9 years it had taken to build something worth building. She thought about what it cost to keep going when the answer kept being not yet. And she thought about what it meant to do the work anyway because you believed the thing you were working on was worth believing in. I think I might be, she said. We're going to find out. The 30 days did not go smoothly. They rarely did. Victor's team ran the first test series and got results that were strong but inconsistent, a variation in 2 of the 12 units that Callum had machined with his own equipment. Audra read the preliminary report on a Tuesday morning and felt the familiar dread of something that had looked solid beginning to soften. She called Callum. I saw the data, he said. He'd been given access to the test reports in real time. Units 4 and 9? Yes, tooling deflection, he said immediately. In my setup, at that channel depth, I'm hitting a resonance issue on the Haas at certain RPMs. It's been a known variable in my setup. I've been compensating for it, but I can't fully eliminate it without better equipment. It's not a design flaw. Can you prove that? If you let me run units 4 and 9 again on a proper machining center, yes. She authorized it. She had a contact at a contract machining house in Durham. She called in a favor. Got Callum 2 days on a modern 5-axis setup with proper fixturing. He drove up on a Thursday. He ran the parts Friday. The remachined units 4 and 9 came back clean. The test results fell into the same tight band she'd seen at Bay 14. Victor wrote her a one-line email, recommend we proceed. From Victor, that was a standing ovation. The negotiation took another 6 weeks after the evaluation concluded. Audra had her legal team develop a licensing structure, and she had specifically instructed them to make it fair from both sides. Not fair in the sense of what Callum might accept out of exhaustion, but fair in the sense of what the geometry was actually worth. She'd done the competitive analysis herself, and she knew what comparable thermal management technology licensed for in the aerospace sector, the EV market, the industrial equipment space. She also knew what Callum had spent, 3 years of nights and weekends, a provisional patent, a Haas mini mill that had seen better days, and the kind of sustained effort that doesn't show up on a balance sheet. There were hard conversations. There were moments where the numbers made both of them uncomfortable, which Audra had come to understand was usually a sign that the numbers were close to right. Too much comfort in a negotiation generally meant someone wasn't paying attention. Callum was not easy to negotiate with. He was precise and he was patient, and he'd clearly thought about what the geometry was worth before he walked into that conversation, which meant he wasn't operating on hope. Audra appreciated this more than she could easily say. When they signed the agreement, it was in the conference room at Kelsey Manufacturing Solutions, late on a Friday afternoon in January. Simone had brought coffee. Victor appeared in the doorway briefly, nodded once in a way that meant he considered the matter settled, and left. Callum's daughter had come with him. She'd brought a book, which she read in the waiting area outside the conference room during the final review. When they came out, she looked up and read her father's face with the accuracy of someone who'd been reading it for a long time. "Good?" she asked. "Good," he said. She went back to her book, as if it had never been in question. Audra walked them out to the parking lot, the way she walked out people she actually wanted to see again. The January air was cold and clear, the sky just starting to take on the particular shade of blue that came at 4:30 in the afternoon in winter. "There's going to be a lot of work ahead," she said. "Production scaling, application testing, getting to commercial units. None of it's straightforward, I know," Callum said, "and you'll be involved in all of it. I want to be clear about that. The geometry is yours. We're not licensing you out of the room." He looked at her. "Why are you telling me this?" She thought about it honestly. "Because someone told me that once," she said, "when I was still figuring out what my work was worth, and it mattered." He didn't say anything for a moment. Then he held out his hand. She shook it. "Thank you," he said. Not effusively. Just, "Thank you." The way you said it when you meant it and didn't need it to be more than what it was. His daughter had come out and was standing beside him. She looked at Audra one more time with those clear, assessing eyes. "Is your name on the building?" she asked, glancing back at the KMS sign above the entrance. "It is," Audra said. "My dad's name is going on the patent," the girl said. "That's what he told me. When it's real, your name goes on it." Audra looked at Callum. He was looking at his daughter with an expression she recognized from earlier, back in the garage. Not pride, exactly, but something that had more weight than pride. "That's right," Audra said. "That's exactly right." She watched them pull out of the parking lot in the minivan with the faded elementary school sticker. She stood there for a moment in the January cold, thinking about the summit, about Bay 14, about a duffel bag with a broken zipper and a component she hadn't been able to categorize. She thought about what it cost to keep working on something when the answer was not yet, and she thought about what happened when not yet finally became something else. She went back inside. There was work to do. There always was. But for a moment, walking back through the lobby, past the KMS sign and toward the elevator, she let herself think that this was the part of the job she'd almost forgotten she loved. Not the building of the thing, exactly, but the finding of it. The moment when something worth building came into view. That was the part that made everything else worth doing.